But in any case, like, back to the whole men's issues thing,
Yeah,
I
let's do
never
that.
really finished pointing out that, like, you'd asked me about my foray into the men's rights movement.
So,
Probably the very first thing I did that gets kind of recognized as men's rights activism would be going to court with a friend of mine who was falsely accused of intimate partner and sexual violence by his ex-wife in a custody battle. And that case lasted for 7 years. And it was a case that was based on entirely, like, no evidence except for the accuser's word.
mhm.
One time she produced a tape that she claimed was him making a prank phone call to her house, and the tape was obviously fake, like, to the degree that the tone, timbre, and accent were different between the guy that was accused and the voice on the tape. And so I began writing about that, and I wrote about it from the standpoint that I was in at the time, which was I was a friend who was just absolutely shocked that the system was so egregiously designed. It was He was a victim of false complaints being filed to the police against him. Um, the police being lied to about him during the investigation. Um, Being perjured against in court. She testified falsely against him in court, and being the defendant in a court case where the beneficiary, I guess you could say, of the prosecution, the accuser, got away with acting in contempt of court, and he had no legal recourse as a victim of these things. He could not get the prosecutor to go after her for filing the false complaints, for lying to police during an investigation, for perjuring herself. And even when the judge held her in contempt, there was no punishment. So for 7 years, she dragged him through this system. And it just got more and more clownish. At one point, he was taken in for questioning on, because they didn't call it arrest, they called it taking in for questioning. So they didn't have to read him his rights, and they didn't have to respect his rights as a an accused man. And he was held for over the whole weekend. On Well, no, he was held over the weekend on a different time. He was held overnight. At this point, 12 hours uh, on a complaint of a drive-by greeting that never happened and shouldn't have happened under the circumstances. And it was just so crazy. So I wrote about this on a social media platform called gather.com that is no longer a social media platform. My stuff's not up on there anymore. Um, and she found it. The vexatious litigant found it during that time that I was writing about it. And at that point, his side of the case, he had filed against her. He had filed a civil complaint for vexatious litigation, and he had like 8 inches of paperwork that he took into court for this vexatious litigation case. So I was calling her a vexatious litigant in my blogs, but not by name. I talked about the situation. I didn't name him, didn't name her, didn't name the kid, didn't give any case information that would have allowed people to find the case and read about it. But she showed up, commented, identified herself in the comments under the blog posts, and then threatened the website with a defamation lawsuit. And they contacted me. They said, "This is what's going on." And I was like, shit, you know. This woman is a vexatious litigant. If she has threatened to sue you, you have to take that seriously. So if you want to censor the posts, I will take them down, and I will reevaluate my writing about this and what my goals are in writing about it. And I will, someplace other than this site where she cannot go after you guys for it, I will start over again. And that's what I did. I started a Google blogger blog called Breaking the Glasses, which is written from the standpoint of eliminating the rose-colored filters through which we view women's actions. And I wrote about dealing with restraining order abuse and vexatious litigation as a tactic in custody battles. I didn't write specifically about that case. I simply gave advice to men in those circumstances. What should they do in that circumstance? And because that completely removed the case from the discussion, she couldn't make any further threats. And that blog got noticed. I posted it. I wanted people to see it because I wanted that advice to get to the people that needed it. In particular, false restraining orders are really, people don't know how damaging they are. Like, if you're a cop and a woman files a restraining order against you, even if you like, she gets this 30-day temporary restraining order, and then you have to go to court, and she has to prove that restraining order is a valid request. And if she doesn't, the judge throws it out, right? But even though the judge throws it out, because that 30-day temporary order was in place, you have lost the right to bear arms. Now you can't do your job as a cop, and you are no longer allowed to be a cop. If you were a cop for 39 years, right? Or 39 years. Let's say you're a cop for 39 years and you had put in your paperwork to retire, and your retirement date was next week, and she files for that 30-day temporary restraining order today. And the clerk of courts gives her that restraining order today, and the date listed on it is today, and you get served during that week, you just lost your retirement. Right? And you're now old enough to have a 39-year career behind you and no retirement because you get fired for losing your right to bear arms. You could be a desk sergeant, right? That no longer works as a beat cop, and you just lost your retirement. And if 30 days later the judge says this restraining order was never valid, you still are out your retirement. You have to fight tooth and nail to get any of that back. And by that time, it's too late. And the level of stress might actually kill you, right?
Yeah.
So the advice that I gave to men, a lot of it was in terms of how to fight this kind of behavior and how to handle the types of tactics that women use this for. And it got noticed in Reddit's men's rights subreddit. And like I said, because I was posting it there, not, just randomly noticed. And that got me into a lot of conversations with men in the subreddit who were going through situations like that, knew people who were going through situations like that, or wanted to know how to avoid situations like that. And that got me also into conversations with feminists who were very upset. At one point, I got accused of telling men how to get away with abusing women. And I got into a huge debate over whether getting out from under a false restraining order constitutes abuse, as if a woman is just entitled to a restraining order because she wants one. And at the end of that, my blog got Allison's attention, and Allison started asking me to write some articles for A Voice for Men. And so I started writing. I wrote about, I think we may have reprinted some of my restraining order abuse stuff, but I wrote about the gender disparity in criminal court. I wrote about abuse of men by women, and society throwing abused boys and men under the bus, sexual violence against boys and men, accountability, women's lack of understanding of what respect actually is, and how it should be treated, and how it should be expressed, and so on, and why. Just a bunch of different things. And when Allison wanted to form the Honey Badger Brigade, she didn't have a name for the group. We had been talking about a name for the group, and she said she wanted to do something with the name Honey Badger because of a conversation that had taken place under a post written by an MRA known as Factory, who felt that it was remarkable and important that there were women that would step out into the fray in the men's rights movement and stand between society's ability to say, well, who gives a fuck about you? You're just men. And you're just complaining about this because you hate women. And the men who are trying to say, no, look, we are being impacted by these issues and it is damaging and destroying our lives. And so, and we take a bit of abuse that's different from other women, and so on.
Because you're a traitor, apparently.
Right, because we're gender traders, so we get kicked out of the sisterhood and spit on and that kind of stuff. And
you're basically the female version of Uncle Tom's.
Right, and we're supposed to care when they call us that, and we don't. So his thing was there needs to be a sort of a descriptive label for that kind of attitude, and because we don't seem to give a shit when they when they say stuff like you should be raped so you would know what it was like, which was said directly to me. And it's like, well, that was a dumb argument. You got anything logical? Where a lot of women would be like, oh my gosh, you just made a rape threat, I'm totally traumatized, triggered, where but Allison and Karen and I and a lot of the other women in the movement uh, are, I guess you could say, we're more
battle hardened,
strategic minded instead of, I don't know, strategic isn't the right word because it's very strategic to claim to be triggered when you're not. But yeah, we're a little more battle hardened. Our skin's a little thicker, right? Mm-hmm. So, oh shoot. It was Dr. Tara Pamontier that actually said, well, what about honey badgers? And she referenced the honey badger video of shoot, like I can't think of his name now either. By the way, the actor I was trying to think of earlier that played Andy Hardy was Mickey Rooney. But Dr. Tara Pamontier suggested honey badgers in that conversation. So Allison wanted something along with honey badgers as well. Well, at about the same time, we had a smackdown, drag out argument, knockdown, drag out argument between A Voice for Men and Kathy Young over the validity of the men's rights movement. She basically argued that a men's rights movement is not needed and is the same thing as a feminist movement. And we kind of, I lambasted her in an article that I wrote for A Voice for Men anonymously, and asked that other honey badgers, and people who are interested in supporting a men's rights movement and not just supporting individual men, consider signing onto it. And a whole bunch, I thought maybe I'd get like 2 or 3 other women that would agree. There were a whole bunch of women that signed on with me. And so we labeled ourselves the Honey Badger Brigade. And so when Allison wanted to start Honey Badger Radio, we went with that name, the Honey Badger Brigade. And the people involved were all part of the group that signed on to that letter. And so far, we've maintained like pretty consistently that same level of attitude and that same continuity in our specific support for men's human rights. And so that's basically how I got involved in the movement. It was this, like, I addressed that case, that 7 years in hell case, on the basis of my past experiences with discrimination against boys, social attitudes toward boys. Like, who cares if my little boyfriend is wearing a pink shirt? Just because you're girls doesn't mean you own pink. Moved forward into, gee, if it's true that he can't hit you back because you're a girl, doesn't that mean that you're picking on somebody who can't hit you back and you're a bully? And and then getting to the point where when the Violence Against Women Act was under discussion, I was appalled. I was reading everything I could about it, and it looked like a terrible law, and I hoped it didn't pass. And then when it did, and I started seeing its impact on the guys around me. The 7 years in hell case was actually a culmination. The 7 years in hell case was actually a culmination.
And that, you can think about it this way: it passed. It didn't just pass, like, let's say, by overwhelmingly Democrats.
No,
It was bipartisan.
it was,
That's how
and
that's how prevalent gynocentrism is.
but a Republican didn't write it.
Well,
A
yeah,
Republican, and the Republicans had passed a law prior to that that was gender neutral. And it took a shitload of lies to get the Republicans that signed on to it to sign on to it. And when it was under debate, the people who were raising objections to it were Republicans. And what happened was Joe Biden wrote that law, and he's bragged about writing that law numerous times. So it's obvious that he really is. He's the writer of the Violence Against Women Act, and this is why it's such a bad law. It was written by an idiot.